Hey, good morning. It's Pastor Doug, and we are here for another Sunday school lesson. We're going through none of these diseases. We're getting closer to the end of this study. I've already been getting a few recommendations for our next study, which might just be a book, chapter, verse through one of the letters in the Bible that we draw inspiration from and we hear as God's word to us because it is God's word. Anyway, we're still going through none of these diseases. We're in chapter 23 of this book from 1963 with S.I. McMillan, M.D., giving us some direction. He's also a faithful follower of God, and he is sharing his wisdom and understanding to us. And this time, he's sharing with us some wisdom that comes from John D. Rockefeller. If you're like me, that's only a name I've seen associated with grants and funds and hospitals. I didn't know the, as Paul Harvey would say, page two or the rest of the story. But like everybody, he's got a life that was shared in this book. In the early life, he was just your average guy. He was a farm lad, healthy, raised out there, doing well. He got into business. And when he started entering business, he applied that farm ethic where he worked hard and he worked long hours and he expected a produce from the labors that he put in. He was driven hard as anyone who's under a boss would be driven. He was self-motivated, so he didn't need someone looking over him in that sense. He directed every waking moment to advancing his work. And it excelled him. It got him noticed. He made promotions. And he started making profits for himself. By the age of 33, he earned his first $1 million. Not bad for a farm lad. By 1943, he controlled the largest business in the world. By the age of 53, he was the richest man on earth and the world's, at that time, only billionaire. But the success cost him. Cost him his happiness. It cost him his life. He developed alopecia, Alopecia. If you guys are looking up any of these things on the internet to say what in the heck it is, it's a... when you say stress-induced, labor-induced, where you lose your hair, and not just like I am, but you lose your eyelashes and your eyebrows, and it's just a sign that your health is on the decline and you're probably not going to make it. One of his biographers said of him at that point that he kind of looked like a mummy that you might see that you take out of one of those Egyptian tombs. He was making at that point in his life $1 million a week. That's an astounding amount of money for anyone to make. He was making $1 million a week, but he couldn't enjoy it. In fact, his health was so poor, he was limited to a diet of milk and crackers. Now, I don't know if anybody would give a diet of milk and crackers today, but that's what he was subscribed and that's what he was eating. He was in every sense a real live Scrooge, like you would hear and we are entertained with in A Christmas Carol. His pursuit of wealth made him a lonely man, and he, in the midst of that loneliness, confessed that he just longed to be loved. I think it's probably a lot of our own longings, whether we have a lot or we have little. There's one thing that we have in common besides our sin, is we have a longing to be loved. He didn't understand why he had become so unlovable to everyone who was around him, but he had been. He was focused on making a profit. He was focused on trying to earn all he could for himself, for his business, for his advancements. And in doing that, he hurt a lot of people. He did not consider how his business decisions affected anyone in his organization except himself. He was only focused on the profit. He crushed the helpless into the mire of their work. And when he was done with their services, he just let them go. He became the most hated person around. He was definitely the most hated person in Pennsylvania oil fields, which he had a large control of it. He was so hated that his workers who were employed by him hanged his effigy in protest of how he treated them, even though he was separated and distant for how his actions and looking for the profit were impacting their lives. His accumulation of wealth gave him neither peace nor happiness. In fact, his effort to protect himself, to control his wealth, to gain more, only made him more miserable. Ida Tarbell wrote of him at age 53, he's the oldest man I have ever seen. His health was that bad. It was generally agreed that he simply wouldn't live to see 54. Newspaper writers were already tasked with writing up his obituary for the moment when he would die, and they could splash it on the front page so everybody would know. It was pre-written, and they thought it was going to come soon. He was the little boy who saw the relentless waves of the ocean sweeping onto the shore to wash away the sandcastles that he had made into oblivion, and there was nothing he could do about it. But then he had this revelation. He realized that money was not a commodity to be hoarded, but something that he could use to benefit others. I'm not told exactly how he came about that. As a believer, I'd like to say it's the nudging of God, that he had a come to Jesus moment, but at least in the way those stories recounted in this chapter, that information is not provided. But after his epiphany that he could use his wealth to help others, he lost no time in transforming his money into the blessings for others. He began to support worthy causes. He began to reconsider how his decisions were impacting his own workers. He established the Rockefeller Foundation so that some of his fortune would be channeled to the areas of need through those who recognized that need. It'd probably require an entire book to describe all the benefits from the many hundreds of millions of dollars that were showered by him through this foundation to hospitals and universities and mission work, helping the underprivileged. You may not know this, I didn't until I read this chapter, that his donation funded the work that rid the South of its greatest economic and physical scourge, which was the hookworm. People got it. It ruined lives, and he funded the medical research and the treatment that essentially eliminated that. You can thank John D. every time one of your children is made better, or yourself, through an injection of penicillin, because his donations led to its development and its availability as a treatment. He's responsible for the work that has saved millions of people from untimely deaths of malaria and tuberculosis, diphtheria, and many other diseases, because he finally had this epiphany that rather than having the world center around him and his profit and his accumulation, which was killing him, that he could extend it to others. It was only when he began thinking outwardly toward the needs of others that the miracle of restored health returned to his life. He began to sleep again. He began to eat normally again. He began to enjoy life in general. He let go of the bitterness and rancor and deadness of a self-centered life. He was encouraged by the refreshing streams of love and gratitude that were beginning to return to him. People were beginning to say, "Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller," instead of, "We don't like you, Mr. Rockefeller." He was transformed into a person who found a new purpose in life. He was transformed from one who was repulsive to one who was adored. Give and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall they give to your bosom. It's going to be overflowing. He lived not only until his 54th birthday, but he lived until his 98th birthday. Now, modern psychiatry is finally catching up with the numerous and valuable biblical admonitions to think outwardly, to look at your life, to find and discover your life as you begin to serve others. One psychiatrist has written, without love, we lose the will to live. Our mental and physical vitality is impaired, our resistance is lowered, and we succumb to the illnesses that often prove fatal. We may escape death, but what remains is a meager, barren existence, emotionally so impoverished that we can only call it half a life. And that's by psychiatrists. Harry and Bonero Overstreet, Observers of Human Nature, if you don't know who those are, you can Google them, look them up, wrote, it is one of the basic facts of human life that the ungiven self is the unfulfilled self. In other words, if you're not sharing your life and sharing what you have to help someone else, you're missing out on the very best part of what life is all about. You know, we have to learn this from someone. But very often what people do in their raising of their own children is that rather than teaching them in a way that would make them look on the outside and look to the benefit of others, they think only of themselves and only what they get. You know, we rush to the cradle to cuddle the baby every time it makes a fuss, and it learns pretty quickly that if it makes a fuss, we'll come running. We supply them with a bottle or a pacifier, even if they're well fed, because we don't want to hear them cry. It bugs us. We want them to stop. And so we'll just do whatever the baby wants to get them to quieten down. We walk the floor, we soothe them because we don't want to hear it. As a first grader, they may report to their parents that a smaller boy called him a sissy, and he got mad about it. And so he knocked the boy down and kicked him in the face for calling him a name. And the doting father sort of smiles to himself and says, good boy. He may say, that was the wrong thing to do, but he really kind of proud of him. When as a sixth grader, the child wails, that old principal punished me for nothing. He doesn't like me. The parents judge the incident on the grounds of the juvenile complaint rather than listening to the adult in the situation. Just a personal note from our good doctor. He said, my father never had to judge any of my pleas because I knew if he heard that I was punished at school, that I would automatically get a whipping at home. Now, this is back in the day when things were done a little differently. Don't read too much into it, but he says, my father might be seen as unreasonable today, but he certainly kept me from being self-centered. Parents who throw mud at their neighbor's doorstep in order to make their own appear cleaner are setting a vicious example for their children to follow, and those children are watching that behavior and they're going to be following it. Parents should not blame their children for having a critical spirit if the dinner table is turned into an autopsy slab on which the neighbors are dissected nightly. You know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So we buy 8-year-old Susie more and more expensive clothes than the family budget can afford. We keep getting all those extra things for them, making the sacrifices for the children, never making any effort for that child to think about themselves or to think about others, but only to think about themselves. So we sometimes as parents do our own children a disfavor. Your parents may have done you a disfavor, but God is a great parent, and he teaches us by his own example, and he teaches us through leading and guiding us through his discipleship to be generous to others, to be tender and kind to those who are around us. It really is possible to think outside of the box, or in this sense, think outside of yourself. One of the things that a parent could do is take Susie and go down to the store and buy a cake mix, and then have her and teach her how to bake it and frost it, and then take that cake and deliver it to a single mother, not because anything's wrong, but just to deliver it and say, hey, we were thinking about you. We just want to bless you and say we love you and know that you struggle and have a hard time, and hope that you enjoy this cake. Hopefully you choose one that they like too. But you get the idea behind that. We can go through our children's closets and donate items to make room for their back to school clothes, as long as they're in good shape. You don't want to be giving off to those kids that are nothing. Around here, like the Adopt a Family program that we're doing this week, you'd be able to take your kids shopping. We've done this over the years with ours. Buy a bunch of food and things and pack it up together and box it up and bring it to the church, knowing it's going to go help someone else. And we let the kids hear how much it was that we're spending on someone else, and it's usually more than what we spend on them during the Christmas season. Giving is something that's beneficial. It's something that we need to do. It will help them, when you teach your children this way, to look for happiness in giving, rather than trying to arrive there by selfish behaviors. Some of the happiest children are those who learn to give up their candy money in order to give to missions, so that they can help the underprivileged. I remember being at a camp once, and we were trying to raise funds for our missionary. There was a canteen time, and the kids at this camp, they always brought $25, $30 to spend on Coke and candy during the week. And so we decided to challenge those kids to take what it would cost them to get a Coke, or take them to cost their candy, and instead of spending it on themselves, to give it to missions. And during that canteen, go do something else. Instead of eat or hanging around where people are drinking a Coke, go play, or go on a hike, or go out in the fields. Go do something that takes you away from that setting where everybody else is feeding themselves, and find some happiness that you are making a sacrifice in order to help someone else. We had an astounding response. Those kids almost entirely, now there's a few who still went to canteen, but almost entirely, man, our canteen sales just went in the bucket. And those kids started doing other stuff, and they were excited about it. And they started sharing with each other, and they'd see someone else not buying, and then it just got contagious. And by the end of the week, we had one of the best missionary offerings that camp had ever seen. And so after the sort of the last offerings made and everything was there, as the staff, we decided to open up the canteen for free for those kids, and they could have a Coke and a candy sort of on the house. And they enjoyed it, but they enjoyed more making that sacrifice to give it to others. A 14-year-old can be encouraged to help a neighbor mow their lawn, rake their leaves, shovel the snow. You can go do it with them. You can just find some way to help somebody. There are a lot of people who need help, a lot of people who aren't ever willing to admit that they need help. But if you live in a neighborhood, you got neighbors, there are probably some of them who could use a little helping hand. They may not be destitute, but they might really appreciate someone stopping by and just helping out a little bit, finding a way to express that love. We need to point our children toward embracing this new identity of seeking blessedness, happiness, peace, and the giving of others, instead of one that is based on competitive sports and being a champion. Man, if you're not that champion, I don't know what we're going to do. Or the fluff and frills of being a princess. If you're not that perfect girl in that image, then you're a failure. Or academics and grade and being the next valedictorian. Or music and drama and being the star of the show. They need to see others and be moved from compassion to help them, and reward that and celebrate that, and let that become their identity, and their goal of finding purpose and meaning in life. So back to John D. Rockefeller. Healthful, enjoyable living is not obtained by grabbing, but by giving. That was a quote from him after his changed life. When the grateful citizens of Cleveland, Ohio congratulated him for all that he had done for others, he said this: "Turn your thoughts upon the higher things of life. Be of service to humanity. Turn your thoughts into channels of usefulness. Look forward to a determination that something useful will come out of your success." So he still advocated being successful, but using your success to benefit and help others. He said, "Let your question be, what shall be the fruit of my career? Shall it be the endowment of hospitals and churches and schools and asylums? Or shall it be about me and my bank account?" He learned the hard way that he had to give up and let go and benefit others. We need to do everything you can for the betterment of our fellow men. It is what the scriptures teach us to do. And we need to do it. We don't want the world taking the lead and being generous. The church should be the forefront of generosity. Unfortunately for John D. Rockefeller, he spent half his life being miserable, half of his life being hated, half of his life being alone. He was successful, but he had the wrong purpose. It would have been so much better if he'd spent half of his life being successful and being a generous, caring man at the same time. It makes you wonder, could he be the same success in caring for his workers and not putting them at harm? I think you could say yes. It took him a long time to learn the lesson, and I hope you learn it quicker. He experienced a wretched life. He learned the hard way that the Bible reveals the secret to happiness, in which you are loved by others by loving them first. That's how God did it. It's unfortunate that he had not learned from God in what God has so plainly revealed to follow his example. And sometimes we miss what God has set before us. It's easy to miss an opportunity to give to others. Now, this is an illustration from Macmillan in his own life. He said that he was in his office and there was a powerful smell, an odor that was emanating from the waiting room. He knew there was someone out there he was going to have to take care of. He found out that it came from a diaper that had not been properly washed before being put back onto the 2-month-old baby who was wearing it and had soiled it again. The mother was in her 30s. This was, she had 9 pregnancies. 7 of her children were still living. 2 had died. She was dirty. She was slouchy. She was poor. She was there because she had this child that needed help. And Dr. Miller says, he's kind of ashamed to admit it, but had it not been for the grace of God in his heart, he probably would have helped her that night and then asked her to find health care somewhere else in the future. The strain of taking on a patient who has so many needs and lives under such poor conditions, who couldn't even really afford the services that he was going to provide, was really more than what he kind of wanted to do. But because he remembered how Jesus left the glories of heaven and came to earth because he sorely needed a physical, mental, and spiritual help that only Christ could bring, he knew that he came, Jesus, even though the odor of his sins must have been revolting in God's nostrils. He came knowing that there was no way we could pay for what we needed. What he needed to provide for us surpassed anything that we could do. And he says, that's what made me show this gal and her family compassion. Psychiatry might affirm the importance of his own health. That, if you just help someone else, it's going to keep you healthy. The psychiatry is finally catching up with the Bible. But he said it's only Christ who provides the sufficient motivation. You can know it's the right thing to do, but not do it. We need something to keep ourselves in check. We need someone to give us the power to step out in beautiful compassion. He said, for whoever will save his life will lose it, Jesus said. And whoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. And we can find our life as we forsake this world and we look to others outside of ourselves, and we show compassion by helping them with things that they can't afford, blessing them with the things that God has blessed us with, acknowledging that it wasn't just for us and for our larger wealth, but it is for the Lord, and it's for his kingdom and his people. That will steer us away from a great many diseases that haunt the souls of those who are selfish. And I hope that as I've gone through this chapter and this story of John D Rockefeller and his transformation, that you might start thinking about the transformation that could take place in your own life as you begin to look at others and have that compassionate heart that drives you to help them.